Welcome to all the people watching this panel in the future. In October, we are recording in August, which is why I'm so sweaty. My name is Shena Wolf. I'm the Director of Comics and Acquisitions at Andrews McMeel Syndication. And today I am speaking with Steenz, who does Heart of the City for Andrews McMeel Syndication. So Steenz, do you want to kick it off with like telling the viewers a little bit about you?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Steenz, as Shena said, and I am a cartoonist. So not only do I do Heart of the City with Andrews McMeel, but I also have a couple of graphic novels as well, one of which I am currently working on. And I am an editor, so I also edit comics. I edit all kinds of comics, and I am a professor. I actually just got back from my very first class of the semester. So here we go, teaching comics, talking about comics all day long.
That's perfect. It's awesome. So you and I have fairly recently done another panel where
yes,
the two of us talking about part of the book. So we're going to make this different. It's going to be totally different. Today we're going to talk about politics. No, we're not going to do that. Surprise, Jason. Anyway, what we're going to talk about is, I thought it would be cool since the NCS Fest crowd tends to be people who are already pretty familiar with comics and definitely already interested in comics. So there's less general knowledge that we kind of need to catch everybody else up on. I wanted to start with like, what do you like best about reading comics?
Oh gosh, about reading comics. I mean, I really love seeing all the different things that people can do with the medium. You know, I was just talking to my husband about manga in particular and how, oftentimes it's just black and white. And oftentimes it's some of the most beautiful stuff you've ever seen, you know? So it's really nice to see what people can do with the medium. But I also really like about comics is you are given time to linger, you know? Like when you're reading a book, if there's a page that's really exciting for you, you can actually take that time and really pour over it and look at the details and think about it. Meanwhile, with like film, you kind of have to pause it and then maybe they're like making a weird face and it's just, it's not the same. So I think for me, it's definitely the ability to linger and really take my time with reading them.
I can't remember who said it, but I've definitely heard people talk about how comics can be thought of as a creative format where the reader is part of that format, since the person who is reading is the one who's really controlling the timing. Like you can do a lot as a creator, but ultimately the person who is taking their time with it is the person who is determining like when those beats actually happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the reasons why there's like such a huge difference between, web comics that update a page a day or a page a week or something versus, getting a graphic novel at the bookstore. It's the pacing is just completely different and it's all the same medium.
Yeah, and like with comic strips, so the pacing within the comic strip itself is so constrained, and then the way that people read comic strips, so you can read it in a newspaper where you get it every day, and so then you have to either recap what's been going on for the reader, or you just trust that they are following along. And that's an interesting thing. Actually, we can shift over to talking about Heart of the City for that, because like most people who are doing comic strips and newspapers are including a little bit about like, here's what happened yesterday, here's the storyline we're in, and you have just like you started doing it immediately, and I was like, this is fine, let's do it. So you have an ongoing storyline, and you don't like, you just like, there is very little hand-holding for that part of it, and you include Sundays in that, which I think is really cool. So like the pacing on your comic strip is very different from some of the other comic strips than people might see in newspapers. Like, can you talk a little bit about what made you decide to do it that way?
Yeah, I felt it was easier. Which
you're right. You should say it.
I just, I'm always thinking about what's the best way that I can do this comic effectively, and it's going to be in its best version of itself. And I think with Heart of the City, the best version of itself is an arc story focused comic. I do try a little bit to kind of catch people up. I'll kind of do some explanation maybe in like the first panel, but for the most part, I am writing it and drawing it as if they plan on reading it all at once. And it's hard because I am always thinking about what's going to happen if someone reads this strip and they haven't been following along. And sometimes I'll say, okay, well, what can I do to make it clearer? And then other times I won't. So I think it just really depends on the arc and what I'm vibing with at the moment. But yeah, I like doing it this way. I think the stories that I like to tell are ones that are ongoing, ones that have longer storylines, but also not in a way that it's like a full graphic novel. You know, like the arcs for Heart of the City at most are what, like 3 weeks, 4 weeks long, and at the smallest 1 week or 2 days. You know, so I do like to have a little bit of variety in there because I am also considering people who are just reading it day by day. So it gives me a lot of options, even though I have a lot of those constraints, which is, you know, the trim size, how people get the comic, when they read the comic. All of that is not stuff that I can decide. So I get to really play around with story with the stuff that I can decide. You know, what's the reader actually going to get out of this? But I say that it's easier because I feel like it's easier to do one longer story and chop it up rather than a bunch of smaller gags throughout, because I only have so many ideas. And I always think about like what it would be like if Heart of the City was a gag comic. And I don't know if I would be able to do it. I think I would just be so stressed at all times at making a new funny thing every single day. So if anything, having these arcs, while it does still take effort and time and concentration and skill to make it so that each one is relatively self-contained, having the overarching storyline helps me with my guidance a lot more.
And I think that, so when you've been doing it for quite a while now, so it's no longer a like, oh, the brand new cartoonist for this thing no one's ever heard of. It's more like, so you've been doing it for a while now. I think that the thing that you're talking about like knowing what kind of story you want to tell is so important for just anybody doing cartooning, really, like having a sense of what, not only what you're good at, but like what you want to do, because comics can be a daily thing that go on for years and years and years. And so if you don't like the kind of storytelling that you're doing, you can feel very trapped.
Oh yeah.
Like, and I know that you've been doing comics for a really long time. Like, is that something that you knew from the beginning, or is that something that you came to as you were doing it?
I definitely feel like it's something that I've learned through making comics, because when I first started making comics, I did not know what I wanted to do at all. You know, I just knew that I liked drawing and that was like the basics. So it's hard to really go into something knowing exactly what you want when oftentimes that sort of thing is not really taught to you or explained to you, you know? So like if you had asked me to do a strip comic 10 years ago, I'd probably be like, I don't even know where to begin with that, you know? I just know single panel comics. So like, I think it's about experience and really like trying a lot of different things to know what you actually like. Like I always talk about, I have my book over here a second ago, but I did a short comic, Receiving Transmissions. It was like 12 to 14 pages. And it was just a one and done, one shot story. And I hated everything about it. I hated the length. I hated writing it. I hated coming up with new things and new characters. I hated every single part of that process, but it took me to do that to realize what I didn't want to do. And what I don't want to do is create stories from nothing. What I don't want to do is do anything that's longer than 15 pages, you know, unless it's a graphic novel, which is a completely different thing, you know? So yeah, I think once you get into comics and start making comics, that's when you're really going to know what you like and what you don't like. It definitely requires you to start making something, you know?
Yeah. And I think there's also comics, like there are statements that you can make about comics as a whole, and then there's more specialized things. So like syndication comics, super different from lots of other sorts of things. Like even the process of like when you started doing Heart, you were doing like 2-week roughs at a time. And you and I recently talked about like what that submission process for like syndication usually is. And I was saying it's 6 weeks. And the reason is because it is that thing where like, from a syndicate perspective, we don't want a cartoonist to sign up to do a thing and then hate it, because like we want consistency and we want longevity. And so in that way, there is a collaboration that isn't necessarily the case in like different kinds of comics where, you know, like if you're an indie creator and you're doing your own stuff, then you're kind of yourself and your publisher. And so you can switch gears. But like for companies, it's more like work for hire relationship kind of things where it's like, okay, well, if this person is a bad fit, then we'll find another person. But with newspaper comics, like part of the thing that people like about them is that consistency and that getting to know the style of a creator, which is why anytime you change anything up, people get really upset. So so it was a thing where like not in the heart stuff so much, but definitely like with other things where I've had to try to find people to take over stuff. Like sometimes the people I'm auditioning like realize that they hate that style. And it's like, well, that's what this is for. Like, it's to find out if you like it or not. Because if you don't like it, this is not for you. Like, ideally, you're gonna do this for like a really long time.
Really long time. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I like this gig, is because it does feel so stable that I'm more inclined to think of new ideas. Like, if I had, like, let's say that Heart of the City.
So you're less likely to phone it in, like,
yeah, 100%. I mean, well, even phoning it in or stressing out, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Like, if there was a deadline for Heart of the City, I'd be like, well, which of these stories that I have in mind are the ones that need to go in? And right now I'm at a point where it's not like which one, it's at what time are these going to go in? Because I'm going to use them all, you know, unless it's absolute trash. But for the most part, all of my notes, I'll like, just the other day, I just did a comic like yesterday about how my cats did not catch the fly in my house. And I was very annoyed by it because they know what their job is. And then I was thinking I could totally use this in Heart. There's got to be a situation where Heart is trying to find the fly in the house and her friends suggest, well, why don't you use my cat? No, you should use my dog. No, you should use a fly swatter. You know, so I think I'm more flexible and more creative, knowing that eventually I will do in all of the ideas that I have. So just feel free about tossing out ideas, you know?
That's fantastic. So you have several comics projects. Oh, also, like, before I forget, you can read Heart of the City on gocomics.com, Heart of the City. And so you work in a lot of different formats. Is it it's so funny because every time I ask questions of professionals, I'm always like, I'm just trying to get information to the audience. Like, I don't think that you don't know what you're doing. In the same way that if I see someone juggling in public, I assume a certain level of competence because otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. But like, what is it like to switch between these different kinds of work? Because like, you also have an editorial background. Like, you've worked in all kinds of comics and all aspects of comics. So like, how do you switch gears?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because like, I think about like the work that I'm doing on my graphic novel and the work that I do for Heart. And during the day, I'm working on both. So I'll do a strip of Heart, a page of the graphic novel, a strip of Heart, a page of the graphic novel. And then the only way I'm like, I realize what I'm doing is different, or I switch gears, is honestly, the page size alone kind of clicks a switch that this needs to be this kind of art. Because I mean, I wouldn't say I'm like completely changing my art style for the graphic novel, but I am working with the knowledge that I'm going to color this later. You know, like I have to take this to the finish line. I don't really have to do that with strip comics. So it's really a thing of, I just need to get through to inking this and then I can be done. So yeah, I don't know, I just force myself to switch gears. I think I'm the kind of person that likes to do a lot of different things. So it doesn't take me much to switch gears. You know, there are some things that I have to do. Like I do all of my editorial work in the morning because that's when my brain is at its peak. If I try and do it at the end of the day, no, I didn't. So yeah, I think morning times is when I am doing stuff that I really need to focus on. And then the afternoons, it's just a matter of executing on work that I have already done. So like you do thumbnails before you do the final pieces. It's the same thing across the board. The only difference is the size and who's going to be looking at it. So I don't know. You just kind of have to like have all of that information available to you and know when to turn things on and when to turn things off. But it doesn't always work like that. The amount of times that I have drawn Hart instead of Cat or Dean instead of Cat, it's just like I don't understand it. Like I get so caught up in the work that I forget even what I'm doing, you know? So those sort of things happen, but there's never a situation where I put myself in Hart, you know, accidentally.
Right.
If I am in Hart, it's intentional.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I wonder with the Hart and Cat and Dean thing, if it's like when parents are trying to remember their kid's name and they just cycle through all the names and they're just like,
Yeah,
oh, I'll get there eventually.
Really
like we'll find it.
I think that's what it is. I think because I've drawn these characters in the same poses so many times now that sometimes my brain turns off and my hands just finishes the drawing no matter what it is. So that's why I think it's really important to actually that these characters are so varied in their style is that I'll recognize it the second that happens, you know, like Hart's face shape is not the same as Cat's. It's not the same as Charlotte. It's not the same. Well, actually Hart and Dean have the same face shape, but the big difference is that one of them has long hair and one of them has big curly hair. So, you know, I think preparing myself is a really good way to not get caught up in the mix of doing a little bit of everything. I'm very organized.
You are incredibly organized. Like it is a really, really seamless process working with you on stuff because you have all these like you have scripts out through next year. Like,
I know.
It's ridiculous.
It is. I was actually finishing up. Well, so I just started 23, and as I'm like getting prepared to start working on April through June, I was like, eventually I'm probably gonna have to like renew my contract, huh? And then I'll start drawing 24. But yeah, it's weird to think that I've got all the way through 23 already written. It's just a matter of drawing it. I mean, like it took a lot of time at the beginning to do this. You know, I forced myself to do the work so that in the future I don't have to worry, you know?
Yeah.
For the most part. Like lately, past Steenz has been getting a little ridiculous. Like sometimes I'll like leave a Sunday and it'll just say, write this, Steenz. And I get to the Sunday and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, those are hilarious. I love seeing those in the scripts that you send over where it really is just write the scenes. I also enjoy the like, so, I mean, the overarching point is that stuff takes the same amount of time. It's just when you're spending that time. Yes. But I also remember when you decided to do the Halloween strip, like storyline, and you're like, Dean's gonna be a mecha, and I was like, are you sure about this for future Steens? Because this just seems, I don't know, like you don't have to do this. You can.
Yeah, after that one, I was like, I need to stop doing like storylines where more than 4 kids are on the page, first of all, because I still think about that Halloween storyline and how long it took me to draw it.
It was very, very complicated. It was fantastic and it looked great, but it was also like when I read the script for it, I was like, what are you doing?
I know.
Oh my gosh. I know. I want to see it, but also
like are you sure? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I always tell myself like, all right, next time less kids, next time less costumes, and then I get to writing and I'm like, oh, but what about this? Like there's definitely a scene in a future Hart comic where they go to a Mystics the Grouping tournament. I'm gonna have to draw all the people that are at the tournament. Like when I wrote it, I was like, yeah, nice. This is great. Good job, Steenz. And oh my God, future Steenz is gonna be pissed. But hey, it's not my problem.
Not yet.
Not
No,
yet.
you've not yet collided with future Steens. It will happen.
I know. When we get around to it, I'm gonna remember this conversation. So
Kind of along those lines, again, since some of the audience for this panel is probably going to be people who might be actually interested in doing comics,
yeah.
How do you like take care of your body when you're doing so much work?
You definitely have to be very deliberate with how you take care of your body, because it's very easy to convince yourself that you don't need to take a break. You know, it's super easy. It's like one of the easiest things to do is to be like, I'll take a break in 5 minutes. I mean 10 minutes. I mean 15 minutes.
I did that with Animal Crossing and I gave myself tennis elbow. So like it can happen in many professional situations.
Yeah, I know. Well, technically, Animal Crossing could be considered professional, considering I did an interview with a comics news site via Animal Crossing. So I was able to expense my $60 Animal Crossing game.
That's amazing. And I regret that we're not doing that right now.
I know, we need to. But
anyway, so
yes, taking care of your body.
Yes.
I mean, one of the first things is honestly is making sure that your setup is ergonomically appropriate for what you need. So I would go online and find out, depending on how tall you are, how tall your chair needs to be, then how tall your desk needs to be, and then where your computer screen needs to be based on that, because all of those numbers makes a huge difference. And all I did was raise my desk a couple inches and move my computer around, and already I was like, what? This is crazy how like quickly this can affect your productivity. Another thing is taking breaks. I know I was saying it's very easy to convince yourself not to take a break, but if you use like a timer, like I'll do a timer of like, I'll do an hour of work and then I have to take a 5-minute break. And that 5-minute break can either be stretching or walking around or getting water, but I'll even set a 5-minute timer that's like, you cannot touch the computer for 5 minutes. And sometimes like 3 minutes will pass and I'll be like, I'm all stretched, I'll get back to it. And it's like, no, take the full 5. Also, if you're a cartoonist and you're doing this full time, you have to have work hours. So like, I don't work past 6 p.m. And if I do, it's like a very special occasion, or like last week I worked late because I have a vacation coming up tomorrow and I don't want to work at all during my vacation. So I did twice as much work, you know, but mostly you want to make sure that you have very clear work hours. Now, if you are not doing this full time and this is something that you are doing on the side, which was my situation until like 2019. So for a long time, I still even had work hours, and those work hours were either 4 hours of work after my day job or until midnight, whichever comes first. And so this way I gave myself the flexibility to work a little longer or work a little less, depending on the amount of work that I had to do. So yeah, so that's a good one. Also, if you're doing this full time, I would recommend like having a hobby that is not sedentary, because I was talking to a physical therapist, and she asked the class, like, how many hours are you sitting? And in my head, I'm like, how many hours am I not sitting? Because that's a number I can actually figure out. You know, I'm always sitting. So if you have a hobby that requires you to go outside and walk, I picked up roller skating. It's going to be a lot better for your body. Like my lower back, like basically doesn't hurt anymore. That was a problem that I had a lot when I was cartooning before I started roller skating, is that because of the way that I look down and lean over my work, my lower back was constantly in pain. And ever since I started roller skating, it's far less pain. And then I also have like a massage chair that I invested in for like $100. And so I'll just like lay on that and let it do its job. So there are ways to take care of your body. And I think if you want to do this for an extended period of time, you should work that into your schedule. It's taking care of yourself.
I think that's all awesome advice and super helpful. And I'm sorry that the small banshee cat that lives in my house has decided to join us a little bit.
Oh, hello.
He's worth seeing just because of his sad kiwi collar, because he overgrooms his back. Anyway, if there are further outbursts, it's that guy.
Great.
So what is your favorite thing about actually making comics?
Oh, man. I really love when people laugh at my comics. Like, no matter what it is, whether it's Heart of the City, or honestly, I try and put a little bit of humor in everything that I do. So like, even in side quests where we're, you know, walking people through the history of tabletop role-playing games, I do as much as I can to put physical humor in there, or like little snide like asides, you know, something that's gonna like keep the levity of the situation, you know. So it's really nice when I have like a joke and it lands. And you know, it's funny because I'm never disappointed when people don't laugh, like at all. I'm like only ever disappointed if someone's just like, you suck. Like, give me some feedback, some constructive criticism here. But overall, when people actually laugh at it, oh my gosh, it's like I'm doing something right. So I like doing that in comics. What else do I like about comics? I don't know. I like that feeling of like being inspired to create comics after you've read a really good one. I just read a couple hundred comics, I feel like, for the Ringo Awards this year.
Yeah.
But it was also a really great time because I was just so inspired. I saw so many good things that I was like, oh, I could do that in my comic, or oh man, I can't wait to try out this style. You know, anything that gets me excited to make comics makes me happy. So, which all of those things don't really have anything to do with the actual process of comic making, like, which is fine. But it kind of reminds me of like when anyone asks like, oh my gosh, how's, you know, drawing the graphic novel? It's terrible. It's terrible. Every second of it is awful. Like, I'm not having fun. This is my job. You know, it's cool. It's a cool job. It's not a fun job. It's hard. Drawing is hard. Drawing for many, many hours is hard. Thinking about storytelling and how to condense information and condense visuals so that it's not going to take you a million years to draw, but also it's going to be very legible to the reader. That's a lot of work, and it's not fun work. It's cool work and it's challenging work. But I'm not like, this is the best thing ever. I can't wait to not sleep, you know? So the actual act of drawing, not always great. But the ideas around drawing, I really like.
And I think that that's a great way to think about it too, because that distinction between cool and interesting, rewarding versus fun, because I do think that people who don't necessarily make comics think that it must be fun to make comics. And I'm sure that there are situations in which it is fun, but at a certain level, like it is a tremendous amount of work.
It's work. Yeah. You're working all parts of your body. You know, you're working your hands because you're actually drawing, but you're also working your head because you're like thinking so much about how it's being received. You know, comics is different than prose or TV because you never know how someone is going to read something visual. You know, like you can read the dog went to the moon, you know, and everyone will have their own like visual, like in their head, like imagining of a dog going to the moon. But it's, what if that was not exactly what the writer wanted to get across? You know, what if the writer wanted to get across that it was the dog that went to the moon, not something else? So then you have to think about, well, how do I make it so that it's clear that the dog is in the place of someone else, you know? So there's just like so much to really think about visually, that it's challenging. And I think it's important for people to know that it's not something that you are born with. It's not a talent. It is 100% a skill. You may have some proclivities that make it easier for you, you know, like there was that thing going around where you ask someone to imagine an apple and like, what do you see in your mind's eye? My apple's very clear, you know? So I have a pretty great, like, it feels like a photographic memory because like I can remember entire layouts to places that I've only been once. So it's like, that's very helpful, but you know, that can be helpful in other, you know, jobs as well. So yeah, not the funnest job, but definitely the coolest job someone can have.
So you do stuff that is collaborative as well as the comic strip, which is like 100% you.
Yeah.
Do you have a prep, like, do you like being the person who's doing all of it? Do you prefer doing one part of it or just the other part, or
You
where do you
know,
stand on that?
it's hard because I am so critical that it doesn't really come off as nice. So I don't know if I would say I'm like the sweetest collaborator to be with, but all my collaborators are happy. So I don't know. I like both for different reasons. I like when it's just me, if it's something humorous, because I know that I can handle it. I know I'm going to be able to get this across the way that I want it to be gotten across. But if it's something, if it's fiction or if it's something that requires a lot of research, I want someone else to do that work. You know, I like working with certain creators because, like, I'll say with Ivy, what's working with her is great because I love their storytelling. I love their characters. I love just the process that we have, which is a completely different reason than why I like working with Sam on side quests. You know, Sam he's got like all of these incredible ideas, but he's also very knowledgeable about the process of comics because he's got a master's in comics and he's actually created comics. So he understands comics at a different level than other people do. So I think each collaboration is very, very different. So it's hard to say which do I prefer considering they're all so different. But right. I will say I do not like being approached to make a comic by a writer. I prefer it if it was someone I already have a rapport with, or if we decide to put something together, because if I don't know them and they want me to draw their stuff, I'm not going to be nice. I'm going to be very critical about all of it from the script to finish, you know? So I want them to understand this is this kind of stuff that's going on in my head, you know? And it's a lot harder to do that when you don't know the person.
Yeah.
So.
Actually, that goes into the next thing I wanted to ask you about. What is the role of community in comics for you? Because like NCS Fest, like National Cartoonist Society, the idea is, of course, you have a bunch of people who are doing not the exact same job, but like a job that you can relate to, which used to be a lot harder to find before the internet. So, but I've also, like, I think I've seen you at shows forever, like way before we met, because you know, like you're just a very specific personality, and I'm trying to not just say like you look really cool and you seem really cool, but that's really what it is. Like you seem really cool. So I always used to see you at like SPX or like I can't remember other places now, but like
Emerald City.
So like I know that you are in community with like all these other comics creators. Like how does that factor into how you relate to comics and make comics?
The comics community is very important to me. It always has been since I became a part of it in 2011, is when I got my job at a comic book store. And it was there where I really found that you kind of have to make your community, you know? Especially when you look like us, comics isn't always the most welcoming. And I noticed that, sorry, I just found out I have a bobby pin in my hair for no reason at all. Anyway, when I first started, reading comics and really getting into them more than just reading what was at my local library and stuff. I was talking to my friend Dan, and he was saying that one of the things that he loves is that he can go into a comic book store and tell somebody what they like to read, and they can immediately have like a connection, because it doesn't matter if it's like you like Marvel, you like DC, or you like indie. If you go into a comic book store, people will be like, oh, that's really cool. And in my head, I was like, I've never had that situation happen before. Every time I go into a comic book shop, people always look at me like I'm crazy, you know? So when I got my job at the comic book store, I was like, that's the first thing I want to do. I want to be that face that's like, you are welcome here, no matter what you look like or who you are, you know? So come in and let me find you a comic that you like. So it definitely all started with wanting to make sure that I was building up a community that showed people that comics is inclusive and it is welcoming. And so when I go to conventions, a lot of time what's most important to me is like the dinners that are afterwards, because I want to be able to like talk to these creators and see what their ideas are and their hopes and their dreams, and you know, who knows what can happen from it. You know, I was doing a in conversation with sort of thing with Gabby Rivera, and they were saying that you should always speak the things that you want to do in your life, because you never know who is listening. And I feel like that's very, very true in comics. Like I'll say, you know, I kind of want to do, you know, an Encyclopedia Brown comic. Someone else from somewhere will be like, hey, I want to read that. And now that gives me the excitement to create that comic. Or if you say you've always wanted to learn how to edit a comic, I may have a spot open as a mentee. And you can just shadow me while I edit this comic, you know? So there are so many opportunities that people can get just from being where you need to be and saying what you're interested in. And I think that everything that I do always has that underlying idea, is opening that door. Robin Warren, who is a geeky health professional who gets people up and walking around and running and really taking care of their bodies. We're on a panel together, and she said, the best way to be in a community is to have one hand forward for yourself and one hand back to bring someone with you. And after she said that, I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. What I want to do is I want to open the door, put a doorstop in, and then just let people come in, you know? So yeah, I think that's always going to be something that matters to me, is representation and community and making sure that the industry, you know, survives. Because like I started reading comics when I was 11, you know, like, or maybe even earlier. And now that I think about it, but it would be sad for me to grow up, be in my 20s, and realize that I can't get into that community, you know? So I want to make sure that it stays alive. And the only way for a community to stay alive is you have to keep ushering in new talent, you know? So yeah, that colors how I do editorial, it colors how I teach. And I don't know if it really affects my work. I guess I'll have to ask other people what they think. It's hard to know what people get out of my work, you know?
I think it absolutely comes through in your work. And just because I say this as a person who knows sort of the bumps in the road that we hit when we were first starting to color Heart of the City. Like you've built a world, and it's full of people who look like the world. And comics has not, like, comics on the comics page in newspapers have not always shown a world that actually looks like the world. It shows a very specific world sometimes. And also the people making those comics sometimes don't reflect the world. So everything that you have said about this is incredibly resonant to me, as part of what I like want to do also, and how I think about comics and community and the future. But like, I want to mention, this is definitely not why I asked if you wanted to like audition for Heart, but the fact that you talk very openly on social media about like what you're interested in doing and how you want to do projects, or like are busy or can't do things. But part of that openness, after I think there were like big events and you were like, I am available for things. And that was definitely part of that. Okay, like who am I looking for? Who can I approach? Who would be good for this? Who has the background to do this in a good way? especially in kind of a time crunchy situation, because if you have all the time in the world, you could audition a million people and find like someone who, you know, like maybe needs to be brought along, but you already had all of that stuff in place. Like you already knew the business, and you're incredibly well organized, as I've mentioned before, but you're also super creative, and the kinds of stories you've told suggested to me that you could do the kinds of stories that would be cool to see in this other thing. But a lot, I mean, a non-negligible part of that was knowing that you wanted to do stuff, like seeing that out in the world and saying, this person might be open to this, so why not approach them?
I think that's exactly what I want people who are getting into comics to know, that in order to make comics, you have to make comics. You have to actually take that step to do it, you know, and that first step may not be opening up a sketchbook, but just saying, it'd be cool to do X, Y, and Z, you know, like, for example, at the beginning of this year, I went to Fan Fest for Final Fantasy 14, which I do not play, nor do I really care about. But my husband's very, very into it. And so he asked if I wanted to do some of the virtual things that they had going on, since it was not in person. And I was like, of course, you know, whatever you do, I do, let's go for it. And going to that convention, although virtual, definitely made me see Final Fantasy in a completely different light, which is wild because I've been watching him play Final Fantasy 14 for 8 years. I'm not new to this, you know, but going to that convention was like, man, now I'm actually seeing not just one player, I'm seeing multiple players. And after thinking about that and talking about it on Twitter, I was like, you know what? I would love to do that for other things as well. I want to go to different conventions for hobbies that I'm not connected to at all and see what I get out of it. And so I like have a comic that I'm putting together about getting into coin collecting. So, you know, I think just like being open about the things that you want to do and taking those steps to actually make it a reality is necessary. It's like the only way things are going to get done. Not everything is going to be like handed to you, you know? I think before we had like super, you know, a lot of talks and stuff, I was just like, how does she know who I am? You know, like, how did you find me? And like, what made her think I would be any good at this? And, you know, now that I think back on it, it's all the stuff that I said. It's talking about the things that I want, being proactive, you know, it all comes together. So, yeah.
Well, I think we're probably like, it's like a 45-minute talk that you and I are doing. So I think we're nearing the end of that. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you really want to mention? I'm
talking to the Cartoonist Society, you know,
and fans of like
fans,
strips.
And fans. I think I would say, first of all, get on to Go Comics and find some comics that you like, because I have found comics that I like. And I don't know if this is a premium thing, but I get an email every 3 a.m. that tells me which comics have come out. I have read more Argyle Sweater and Bliss than I have ever read in my life. And I love it. So if you like getting comics in your email every day, do it, because I actually love it. It's like the one thing that I'm like, Go Comics, you got it this time. So there's that. Also, if you're even remotely interested in doing comic strips, don't feel like you have to do like any other comic strips. There are so many comic strips that are like, you know, Calvin and Hobbes, where it's focused on a young person who is bright eyes and is confused about the world, and that's where a lot of the jokes come from, which is great. But it's also been done. So what else do you want to see? Make it. You know, the kind of stuff that I wanted to see stories that were overarching. I was like, I can't do current events anymore. I don't want my comics to talk about COVID. I'm sorry. So I made a comic that didn't have to do that, you know? So yeah, I would say make the stuff that you want to see, which I feel like everybody says this, but it's true. You do kind of have to make it, because once you make it, someone else will see it and be like, hey, I can do that too. And then now it's not just you making the stuff you want to see, it's more people making the same stuff. So that's what I got as a sign off.
That's fantastic. This has been really, really fun. I wanted to make it different from the other talks we've done, just because, you know, how many times can we talk about like what was the process of auditioning for Art in the City? But I like, you've shared so much super helpful stuff, I think, for people who are interested in comics and people who are interested in making comics. And you did a great plug for Go Comics, which I didn't ask you to do and didn't even think about doing. So like, amazing.
I got it.
So yeah, so thank you for everybody watching in the future at NCS Fest. Thanks to Steenz for being a part of this awesome talk. And yeah, like have a great day.
What was that?